There are moments in life when you realize somebody has been disrespecting you for a long time, and somehow the thing that finally makes it obvious isn't a huge betrayal. It isn't some screaming match in public. It isn't even a direct insult. Sometimes it's just water. The first time I knew my neighbor was deliberately turning my backyard into his drainage ditch, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold twice. I wasn't doing anything important. I was just staring out the window, watching rainwater move across the grass while trying to convince myself I wasn't becoming one of those middle-aged guys who spend their mornings monitoring the neighborhood. Then I saw it. A stream of water shot through a gap near the back fence, not trickling, not overflowing naturally, shooting. A hard, steady stream pouring from a white PVC pipe hidden behind some shrubs on the property directly behind mine. For a few seconds, I honestly just stood there blinking. Because when something is ridiculous enough, your brain doesn't immediately process it as a problem. It almost looked cartoonish, like somebody had connected a fire hose to their house and pointed it straight at my yard. And here's the embarrassing part. 3 months earlier, I probably would have apologized for being annoyed. That's who I used to be. I lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Franklin, Tennessee, and for most of my adult life, I avoided conflict like it was a contagious disease. Maybe that's what 15 years of marriage and a brutal divorce will do to a person. You get tired. Tired of arguments, tired of lawyers, tired of explaining yourself. After the divorce, the little brick house I bought wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, every decision belonged to me. The backyard became my project, my therapy, my reset button. I built raised garden boxes with my daughter Emma, hung string lights over the patio, spent way too much money trying to grow tomatoes that local squirrels treated like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Nothing special, nothing Instagram-worthy, but every little improvement felt like proof that life could move forward, that things could grow again. Then Nolan Pierce moved in behind me. Now, if you've ever met somebody who walks into a room and immediately starts behaving like he's the smartest person there, you already know Nolan. Late 40s, perfect haircut, expensive sunglasses, always driving some luxury SUV that somehow looked freshly detailed every single day. The man never appeared rushed, never appeared stressed, never appeared uncertain. You know those people who somehow make confidence feel aggressive? That was Nolan. The house he bought had belonged to an older couple who'd lived there forever. Within 2 weeks of moving in, construction crews showed up. Then more construction crews, then landscapers, then concrete trucks, then surveyors. At one point, I think there were more workers on that property than residents. Every morning started with backup alarms and power tools. Every afternoon ended with another delivery truck. It looked less like a renovation and more like somebody preparing a private resort. The original backyard had a natural slope toward a wooded drainage area shared by several properties. Nothing dramatic, just enough grade that heavy rain would gradually move away from the homes. But Nolan changed everything. Retaining walls, stone terraces, extended patio, artificial turf, underground drainage. The place looked beautiful, I'll give him that. Beautiful in the way luxury hotel courtyards look beautiful. Clean, perfect, expensive, and somehow completely disconnected from reality. The first major storm after the renovation came through in early spring. The next morning, I noticed standing water near my back fence. I didn't think much about it. Rainstorms happen. Ground gets saturated. Life goes on. But 2 days later, the water was still there. 3 days later, the grass started turning yellow. A week later, sections of the yard felt like wet sponge cake. Then another storm arrived. That one changed everything. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was thunder. Then I thought maybe a branch had fallen, but the noise didn't stop. It was continuous, like rushing water. I walked into the kitchen half asleep and looked outside. That's when I saw the pipe. Water was blasting from it in a solid stream, not runoff, not overflow, a concentrated jet aimed directly into my property. The beam from my porch light caught the spray, and for a second it looked almost silver in the darkness. The stream cut through my lawn and carved a muddy channel toward the center of the yard. I remember laughing, actually laughing, because the sight was so absurd. Then I looked farther out. My entire backyard was underwater. Meanwhile, Nolan's property looked pristine. Dry patio, dry grass, dry walkways. Every drop had been redirected somewhere else. Somewhere else. The next afternoon, I walked over there determined to be reasonable. I rehearsed the conversation 3 times before I crossed the property line. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't even looking for an apology. I just wanted him to know there was a problem. Nolan was outside, wiping down a stainless steel grill that probably cost more than my first car. I said, "Hey man, I think your drainage setup is pushing a lot of water into my yard." He barely looked up. "Water runs downhill." That was it. No concern, no curiosity. Just 4 words. I pointed toward the fence. "Yeah, naturally this looks a little different though." He finally glanced over, then shrugged. "My contractor says everything's compliant." Compliant, funny word. People love that word when they're trying to avoid responsibility. I stood there for another second waiting for something, any sign that he cared. Instead he smiled, not a friendly smile, the kind people give when they think the conversation is already over. "If you've got concerns," he said, "talk to the contractor." Then he went back to polishing the grill, and just like that, I understood exactly how much my flooded backyard mattered to him. Not at all. I wish I could tell you I immediately fought back. I didn't. I went home irritated, then frustrated, then weirdly ashamed, because that's what people like Nolan do. They make you feel unreasonable for objecting to something that's obviously wrong. Over the next few weeks, the flooding got worse. Mosquitoes multiplied. Parts of the lawn died. The garden boxes Emma and I built started sinking into soft ground. One Saturday, she came over for the weekend and stepped into a muddy section near the fence. Her shoe sank almost to the ankle. She looked down, then looked at me. "Dad, why is it always wet back here now?" I gave her some vague answer about drainage. She stared toward Nolan's property, then asked a question that stayed with me for days. "Do you think he's doing it on purpose?" Kids have a way of cutting through all the nonsense adults hide behind, because the truth was, part of me already knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. And once that question entered my head, I started noticing things I should have noticed sooner. The timing, the attitude, the little comments. One evening I was dragging trash cans to the curb when Nolan happened to be walking past. He glanced toward my backyard and said, almost casually, "You might want to regrade that property. Standing water can hurt resale value." Then he kept walking, like he was offering stock market advice. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, not exactly. Something quieter, something colder. The kind of feeling that shows up when you finally stop hoping somebody will do the right thing and start paying attention to what they're actually doing. And once I started paying attention, everything changed. Everything changed because once you stop giving someone the benefit of the doubt, you start seeing details that were hiding in plain sight. The next storm rolled through 4 days later. This time I was ready. I set up a lawn chair near the kitchen window, balanced my phone on the counter, and started recording before the rain even began. I felt ridiculous doing it, like some amateur private investigator working a case nobody else cared about. But about 20 minutes after the rain started, the evidence practically gathered itself. Water flowed off Nolan's stone patio. It disappeared into underground drains. Then, almost on cue, that same white pipe behind the fence came alive. The stream shot directly into my yard. Not spread out, not diffused, focused, controlled, purposeful. I recorded everything. The pipe, the pooling water, the mud, the damaged grass, the way the stream carved the exact same channel every single time. Then I started documenting dates, rainfall amounts, photos, videos, measurements, anything I could think of. At first it felt obsessive, then it started feeling necessary. A few days later I called my friend Rachel. I'd known Rachel for years. She worked for a surveying company and spent most of her life studying property lines, grading plans, and drainage systems. If dirt moved, Rachel probably understood why. She came over on a Saturday morning carrying a level rod and wearing boots that looked older than some marriages. We walked the fence line together. She didn't say much at first, just studied the terrain, examined the retaining wall, looked at the discharge pipe, checked elevations. Then she crouched near the muddy section behind my garden beds. "You know this isn't accidental, right?" I looked at her. "I've been starting to suspect that." "No," she said. "I mean this was designed." That word hit differently. Designed, because accidents happen, mistakes happen, but design requires intention. Someone sits down, makes decisions, creates outcomes. Rachel stood up and pointed toward Nolan's retaining wall. The original slope would have sent most of the water toward the wooded drainage easement. His renovation interrupted that path. "So where's it supposed to go now?" She pointed toward my backyard. "Apparently here." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes frustration comes out looking exactly like laughter. That night I started digging through county regulations. Most of it was mind-numbingly boring. Pages of engineering language, permit requirements, stormwater terminology, enough legal jargon to put an insomniac to sleep. But eventually I found something interesting. Property owners could not intentionally concentrate runoff and discharge it onto neighboring properties in a manner that caused damage or nuisance conditions. I read that sentence at least 10 times, then 11, then 12, because suddenly the situation looked different. This wasn't just annoying, it might actually be wrong, legally wrong. And if I'm being honest, that's probably when most people would have called the county. Maybe they would have been right. Maybe that would have saved months of headaches. But there was a reason I hesitated. Actually, there were two reasons. The first was exhaustion. I'd spent nearly 3 years fighting legal battles during my divorce. Courtrooms, mediators, paperwork, arguments over things neither side even wanted anymore. By the time that chapter ended, I'd developed a deep appreciation for staying away from official disputes whenever possible. The second reason was Nolan. Guys like Nolan don't learn from letters. They don't learn from warnings. They don't learn from people politely asking them to stop. They only learn when reality starts inconveniencing them. And right then, reality wasn't inconveniencing him at all. It was inconveniencing me. A week later, I called a landscape contractor named Miguel Santos. Miguel had been recommended by half the neighborhood. He was one of those guys who could glance at a yard for 30 seconds and immediately understand things nobody else noticed. When he arrived, I explained the flooding situation. He listened quietly, walked the fence line, studied the slope, looked toward Nolan's retaining wall, then lit a cigarette, took one drag, and asked a question. "You want the legal solution or the satisfying solution?" I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. "What exactly is the difference?" "The legal solution takes paperwork." He smiled. "The satisfying solution takes landscaping." Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't trying to damage anybody's property. I wasn't trying to flood anyone's basement. Honestly, if I'd gone down that road, I'd be the bad guy in this story. What I wanted was simple. I wanted my backyard back. Miguel spent almost an hour studying elevations. Finally, he stopped near the rear corner of the property, the spot where both lots naturally dipped before Nolan's renovations changed everything. He nodded slowly. "There it is." "What?" "The path water originally wanted." That sentence stuck with me. The path water originally wanted. Miguel explained that water always seeks the easiest route. Humans can interfere, redirect, delay, force, but eventually gravity wins. It always wins. "So what do we do?" I asked. He grinned. "We remind gravity where to work." The project started the following week. To anyone driving by, it looked completely ordinary. A landscaping upgrade. Nothing more. Miguel's crew built a decorative flower bed along the rear fence. Natural stone edging, black mulch, native grasses. A few shrubs. Everything tasteful, everything legal. Everything sitting entirely on my side of the property line. What nobody could see was the structure hidden underneath. Compacted soil, gravel reinforcement, careful grading, a low berm running behind the decorative landscaping. Not massive, not ugly. Just enough elevation to interrupt the concentrated stream coming from Nolan's discharge pipe. Miguel called it hydraulic correction. I called it beautiful. The work took 3 days. When they finished, the flower bed looked fantastic. Emma loved it. The neighbors complimented it. Even I was surprised by how natural it looked. The entire thing blended seamlessly into the yard. And then we waited. Because no matter how confident Miguel sounded, nature still had to test the theory. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. A major storm system moved for the following weekend. Dark clouds rolled in just after dinner. Thunder started around 8. By 9, the rain was coming down sideways. Emma happened to be spending the weekend with me. We made microwave popcorn, pulled stools up to the kitchen island, and watched the backyard like it was movie night. Eventually, she pointed toward the fence. "There it is, the pipe." Water exploded from the opening. The same stream, the same force, the same flood that had been invading my property for months. Except this time something different happened. The water slammed into the berm, spread sideways, lost momentum, then began moving along the natural contour Miguel had restored, exactly as planned. I leaned closer to the window. Emma practically climbed onto the countertop. The stream continued flowing, but instead of charging through my lawn, it drifted harmlessly along the edge of the property, following gravity, following terrain, following the path it probably should have taken all along. By midnight, my backyard looked better than it had in months. The standing water never formed. The garden beds remained dry. The grass stayed intact. And somewhere beyond the fence, the consequences finally found a new address. The first sign appeared 2 days later. Nolan was standing in his side yard talking on the phone, or maybe arguing. It was hard to tell. His shoes sank into the mud every few steps. He looked frustrated, confused, offended, like reality had suddenly stopped cooperating. A week later, another storm hit, then another. Each one produced the same result. My yard improved. His side yard deteriorated. Puddles started forming. Mud expanded. Contractors appeared. Left, returned. Left again. One afternoon I spotted Nolan staring directly at the fence line, arms crossed, expression tight. He wasn't looking at the flower bed. He was studying it, like a detective inspecting a crime scene. I had a feeling it wouldn't be long before he came knocking. And sure enough, the knock came the following Saturday morning. Not a friendly knock, not a neighborly knock. The kind of knock somebody uses when they've already decided they're angry before the conversation even starts. I opened the front door holding a coffee mug. Nolan stood there wearing expensive loafers that were now stained with dried mud. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked one question. "Did you change something back there?" I took a sip of coffee, not for dramatic effect, at least not intentionally. But looking back, it probably looked dramatic as hell, and the expression on his face told me he already knew the answer. The only question now was what happened next. Nolan stood on my porch with dried mud on shoes that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, staring at me like he was trying to decide whether to accuse me of something or convince me to confess. "Did you change something back there?" he asked again. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing. "I added landscaping." His jaw tightened. "Now my yard is holding water." I nodded slowly. Huh, he repeated. "Yeah, huh." For a second I thought he might actually laugh from disbelief. Instead, he pointed toward the back of our properties. "You redirected drainage?" "No," I said calmly. "I protected my property." The silence that followed was almost impressive. Because in that moment he realized something important. I understood exactly what he had been doing, and more importantly, I understood the rules. "You trying to make some kind of point?" he asked. A year earlier I would have backed down. I would have softened my words, tried to keep the peace. But standing there looking at months of frustration wrapped up inside one angry man covered in mud, I suddenly understood something about bullies. Most of them aren't empowered by strength. They're empowered by other people's discomfort. The moment you stop being uncomfortable, they lose half their power. So I looked him in the eye. "No, Nolan, I'm just letting gravity make its own decisions." He stared at me for several seconds, then turned around and walked away without another word. That should have been the end. It wasn't. For about 2 weeks, everything became strangely quiet. No comments, no complaints, no surprise visits. Just an invisible tension stretching across the fence line. Then the neighborhood rumor mill started spinning. Every subdivision has one person who somehow knows everything. In ours, that person was Linda Harper, retired school secretary, drove a golf cart everywhere, possessed information before information officially existed. 3 days after Nolan showed up at my door, Linda slowed beside my mailbox and lowered her sunglasses. "I hear there's a drainage conflict developing behind your house." A drainage conflict. The phrase sounded like something the United Nations should investigate. I laughed. But apparently Nolan had been telling people that I'd altered watershed behavior between adjacent properties, which is a very sophisticated way of saying my neighbor stopped letting me use his backyard as a dumping ground. What fascinated me wasn't that he was complaining. It was that he genuinely seemed convinced he was the victim. And maybe that's the strangest thing about entitlement. When people benefit from an unfair situation long enough, fairness starts feeling like persecution. Then came the storm. The storm, the one everybody still talks about. It arrived late on a Thursday evening. The weather forecast had been warning about it for days. Strong winds, heavy rainfall, possible flooding. By sunset, the sky had turned that strange greenish color that always makes people nervous in Tennessee. Patio furniture disappeared. Trash cans got secured. Everyone settled in. Around midnight, thunder rattled the windows hard enough to wake me up. I walked into the kitchen and looked outside. At first I thought I was imagining things. Then lightning flashed, and there he was, Nolan, standing in the rain. At 1 o'clock in the morning, wearing a rain jacket over what appeared to be pajama pants, holding a giant corrugated drainage tube. I blinked, then looked again. Nope, still there, still wrestling with it. Apparently he had decided that if nature wasn't cooperating, he'd simply overpower nature. The tube seemed intended to bypass the berm and redirect water somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't his yard. Somewhere suspiciously close to mine. I stood there eating leftover cheesecake directly from the container while watching this unfold, and I have to be honest, it was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen. Months earlier, the situation had stressed me out so badly I couldn't enjoy my own backyard. Now, I was watching a grown man lose a physical fight with gravity. Then, everything went wrong. The tube shifted, one end slipped. Water blasted sideways. Instead of flowing where he intended, it slammed directly into an unfinished section of retaining wall. The wall held for maybe 3 seconds. Then came a deep cracking sound, a heavy crunch, and part of the structure collapsed into the mud. Nolan froze. The rain kept falling. The wall kept leaning. And for one brief moment he looked exactly like a man watching several expensive mistakes introduce themselves all at once. You'd think I felt victorious, honestly. Not really. Maybe a little satisfied, but mostly tired, because the entire situation existed for one reason. One man had decided solving his problem was more important than avoiding someone else's, and eventually reality sent him the bill. The following Monday, things escalated quickly. One of the contractors involved with the damaged retaining wall apparently reported concerns during permit discussions. That triggered a county inspection, which triggered questions, which triggered paperwork. Funny how seriously everyone takes drainage once insurance companies get involved. The inspector arrived around 10 in the morning. Her name was Carol Bennett, mid-60s. Sharp eyes, no-nonsense attitude, the kind of person who could probably stop an argument simply by entering the room. She walked both properties slowly, taking notes, studying elevations, examining structures, following water paths. Nolan followed close behind, talking constantly. The drainage patterns changed after he altered the landscaping. He redirected runoff. He intentionally modified flow conditions. Finally, Carol stopped walking, turned toward him, and raised one hand. "Sir, I'll ask questions if I need answers." Silence. Instant silence. I nearly smiled. Nearly. When she reached my property, she asked a simple question. "Do you have documentation?" I handed her a folder. A thick folder, months of photos, videos, measurements, dates, rainfall records, screenshots, property maps, notes. The whole thing looked like evidence from a criminal investigation. She spent several minutes reviewing everything, then walked directly to the fence line, studied the discharge pipe, checked the grading, made a few more notes. Finally, she looked at Nolan. "You installed concentrated discharge without adequate retention infrastructure." Nolan blinked. "My contractor said it was compliant." She didn't even hesitate. "Your contractor was incorrect." Just like that. No dramatic courtroom scene, no emotional speech, no triumphant music. One sentence. One exhausted government employee ending months of nonsense. She explained that my landscaping improvements remained entirely on my property and simply restored natural surface flow. His drainage system, however, concentrated runoff and discharged it toward a neighboring lot in a manner that created damage. The distinction mattered a lot. By the end of the inspection, Nolan received a formal compliance notice. 30 days to correct the issue. Failure to comply would result in additional enforcement measures. When Carol handed him the paperwork, I looked away, not because I felt guilty, because I didn't trust my face. The repairs started less than 2 weeks later. Different company, different attitude. No giant egos, no luxury resort energy, just professionals doing the job correctly. They installed underground retention systems, gravel trenches, a dry well, proper absorption infrastructure, the exact kind of drainage solution that should have existed from the beginning. And then something remarkable happened. Nothing, no flooding, no arguments, no complaints, no drama. The next storm came and went. My backyard stayed dry, the grass recovered, the garden boxes stabilized, the mosquitoes disappeared. Life returned. One evening, Emma and I sat outside eating cheeseburgers beneath the string lights. Summer cicadas buzzed in the trees. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass instead of swamp water. She looked around for a moment, then smiled. "It feels peaceful again." Out of everything that happened, that was probably my favorite moment. Not the inspection, not the compliance notice, not the collapsed wall, That sentence, because peace was all I'd wanted from the beginning. As for Nolan, we still live behind each other. We wave sometimes. Not warmly, not coldly, just enough to acknowledge that neither of us disappeared. Every now and then, after a heavy rain, I'll see him standing near one of the drainage grates, checking everything over, making sure it's working, making sure the water stays where it belongs. And if I'm being completely honest, I sometimes glance over there too. Old habits die hard. But here's the thing people always argue about whenever I tell this story. Some say I should have called the county immediately. Others think the berm was passive-aggressive. A few think I enjoyed watching the consequences a little too much. Maybe they're right. Maybe there was a more mature path through all of it. I honestly don't know. What I do know is this. I never flooded his yard. I never damaged his property. I never tried to punish him. I simply stopped volunteering my property as the solution to his problem. And once I did that, gravity handled the rest. So now I want to ask you, what would have been the right move? Would you have reported him from the start? Would you have handled it the way I did? And where exactly is the line between protecting yourself and getting even? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I have the feeling people are going to be split right down the middle on this one. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor who pushed things too far, share your story too. And if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because trust me, some of the craziest stories are still coming.